Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Monday. This is Seattle Now. Sound Transit board members made painful cuts to account for the agency's multi-billion-dollar shortfall. Seattle Times transportation reporter Mike Lindbloom is here to talk about which projects are still on track and which ones have been derailed. But first, let's get you caught up. To celebrate the start of Pride Month, Seattle Mayor Katie Wilson will raise the Pride flag at Seattle City Hall today. She'll be joined by City Council members Dion Foster and Joy Hollingsworth, as well as several members of Seattle's LGBTQ Commission. This year marks the 14th annual flag-raising ceremony at City Hall. The event kicks off at noon. Another pickleball club is opened in the Puget Sound region. Over the weekend, the national chain Pickler opened a massive pickleball club in Federal Way with space for 14 courts. Just last month, the company opened a club in Fremont, and Tacoma is getting a facility in September. The Puget Sound Business Journal reports Pickler's looking to expand next to either Redmond or Bellevue. And state officials are celebrating a big birthday today. Washington State Ferries turns 75. It began operation on June 1st, 1951, taking over from the privately owned Puget Sound Navigation Company. The first trip that day was between Lowfall on the Kitsap Peninsula and South Point on the Olympic Peninsula. To celebrate, the agency is raising an anniversary flag on top of the Space Needle and hosting a celebration at Coleman Dock today from 3 to 5. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now.
Our communities voted for ST3 and have been paying for it since 2016, and anything less than what the voters approved is not acceptable.
Well, pour one out for the Ballard light rail extension. Despite what King County Executive Girmay Zahilay said, it may never get built. That decision came after a meeting last week where Sound Transit board members took steps to reconcile a $34 billion anticipated budget shortfall. The meeting went for 5 hours, and there was a lot of passion around where to put light rail.
I was 18 when I voted for ST3 in 2016. Since then, I have ridden Sound Transit every year.
You mean to tell me the 4 line is now $100 million cheaper and we haven't even started the planning work yet?
Delaying Ballard further means it's going to be so expensive in the future that it's basically never going to get built.
Keep the Everett Light Rail extension on track, on time, and on budget.
Please build the Graham Street station.
The Ballard line wasn't the only thing cut. Seattle Times transportation reporter Mike Lindbloom was at the meeting and is here to break it down. Mike, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Trish. Good to be on with you.
So what do listeners need to understand about what happened at that meeting on Thursday?
On a day when Mark Zuckerberg's yacht docked in South Lake Union, Ballard's ship did not come in with the Sound Transit Board. The board decided to stick with their earlier plan and continue to design a project that builds a second tunnel through downtown from Soto, stopping at Seattle Center, which leaves Ballard high and dry for many years, possibly until the early 2050s, depending on what kind of money or savings they can figure out in the meantime.
I'm glad you brought up 2050 because let's talk about how far this board was planning into the future. Why did they need to make these decisions so urgently?
The immediate reason that they dealt with it now is that according to a provision in state law, Sound Transit is required to constantly adjust its long-term plans so that they roughly match the amount of money available. And the purpose of this is to avoid getting underwater, making exorbitant promises, things like that have happened in other mega projects around the world. It's actually the fourth time there's been a so-called realignment.
And those readjustments have been a thorn in the side of both the public and Sound Transit board members through the years. You were in the room on Thursday. What did you hear during public comment? What was the mood like?
The public was a lot more agitated than the transit board members. Some of the transit board members took a selfie afterwards, and they said a lot of things about cooperating with one another. In the public, there was a lot of testimony of betrayal if Ballard is left off. Some members of the public would like to see more revenue being raised. There was even a voice vote by the board where members of the audience yelled out to try to put their voices in to the board members' vote and try to stand up for Ballard.
Well, it's funny because this is an emotional experience for a lot of people, because I was reading into the history of this. More than 90% of people in Ballard voted in favor of ST3. So let's talk about what they passed, what Sound Transit 3 was. 10 years ago, it was a tax increase, but what was the promise?
Well, the margins in Ballard were more in the 70s to 80s. There may have been a precinct hitting 90. It's still a landslide, no matter how you slice it. The promise was take the light rail system of approximately 60 miles and stretch it out to 112 miles, plus build more bus rapid transit routes and commuter rail extensions, approximately a dozen huge projects and some smaller projects throughout 3 counties. The light rail portion of that would be as long in length as Washington, D.C.'s metro system, for perspective. This was a massive tax increase, roughly $700 a person.
What aspects of ST3 has Sound Transit actually delivered on at this point?
None of ST3 that I can think of has been delivered. Sound Transit just finished. On March 28th, they completely fulfilled Sound Transit 2 that voters approved in 2008. And that was just a sales tax only. By crossing Lake Washington, Sound Transit has now completed Sound Transit 2. The first big project underway for Sound Transit 3 is something called STRIDE, ST-RIDE. It's a freeway bus system that has lines on I-405, Linwood to Bellevue, then Bellevue through Renton to Burien. And then there's another line that goes around the north end of Lake Washington through Bothell, Kenmore to the Shoreline South Light Rail Station. That'll be open in 2028 and 2029. There is one thing this August. Pinehurst Station at Northeast 130th, next to the freeway. That actually is a Sound Transit 3 project that's in a very isolated area with hardly any housing and jobs. It was supposed to be promised by 2031. It's actually happening in 2026. It's been accelerated. It's happening sooner than the ballot measure.
Mike, cost overruns are always a thing with massive construction projects. How much of this is just the cost of doing business, and how much of this is beyond the pale?
So some of this is the cost of doing business. Construction inflation this decade has ranged by various estimates from 40% for overall heavy construction to 70% for highway construction specifically. And Sound Transit is kind of a hybrid of those two things, right? So that's a legit problem that is beyond Sound Transit's control, although if you plan to build faster, you might avoid some of that, but they didn't. Sound Transit itself has shot itself in the foot by promising more on the 2016 ballot than it could really deliver. They underestimated real estate costs in West Seattle. They launched a planning process with multi-layers and spent years in redundant night meetings that ought to have been spent finding leaner designs and really nailing down a stronger financial strategy.
Mike, I cannot help but think that some of the people making the decisions today about tomorrow's light rail future are not going to be around to be held accountable for the things that they say and do today.
Direct lines of accountability are few and far between here. The 3 county executives, Ryan Mello in Pierce County, Dave Summers, Snohomish, and Girmay Zahilay in King County, are directly elected, of course. The other members have elected posts in their individual cities and might face up or down votes based on transit, but that usually doesn't happen in their own communities, and they're not directly elected. The direct line of accountability is to vote yes or no when the big tax measures come around. And elected officials have every reason to believe that they'll enjoy more support by persevering with Sound Transit 3, and that very few constituents, especially in Seattle, are going to reward people for cutting or delaying light rail.
All right, well, Ballard being indefinitely delayed is the big headline from last week's meeting, but is there anything else that Sound Transit committed to creating or that got cut?
Right. A couple really important things. The first of which is that the Graham Street station has been resurrected. That station was promised by 2031, and then it appeared on a cut list a few weeks ago. The community rallied. Girmay, Zahilay, Mayor Katie Wilson, and some of the other board members went and listened to people in the Graham Street area, and folks rallied behind it, and it's back on track.
And just to remind listeners, that Graham Street station is in South Seattle, right?
Right. It's about halfway between the Othello and Columbia City stations.
Okay.
A second major thing that happened, and you were asking about procedure and why they're passing this thing. By passing this thing, and this was a point Zahilay really pushed, by passing this thing, it gives the green light for West Seattle to continue. There's one more aspect that's related to this, which is that Renton got back on the board for a $100 million parking garage that goes with this freeway bus line. Renton is an area that has carried a tax burden for everybody else. It's never going to get light rail. And dropping their only big project, which is this garage to help use a future freeway bus line, was just really repulsive to leaders in Renton. It got back on the board.
Now that Sound Transit has officially said what is affordable, is there a timeline for when those things might be built?
There is not. And members of the public yesterday who overflowed the boardroom many of them were asking for a date. Dan Strauss asked for a date for Ballard, and the board passed his amendment saying that the staff should come up with a date range this August for when Ballard might be achievable. Those are subject to change. But there aren't very good dates on these.
And you touched on this briefly, but let's talk about the possibility that the Ballard extension could be resurrected at some point.
Yeah, it could. Mayor Wilson brought this up, additional revenue streams. The board passed her amendment to have additional studies of taxes, either regional taxes, a local Seattle-only tax, maybe a special property tax levy, and a whole lot of other options they might try to raise more money to go to Ballard.
What are the most immediate things we could see from Sound Transit, and how soon, Mike?
Well, Pinehurst Station to open later.
Yeah.
Graham Street seems to be in better shape than everything else to happen soon.
Last week's meeting made clear that Sound Transit cannot fulfill every ST3 promise, as we've been talking about, at least in the next couple of decades. What should voters make of that, given our conversation about accountability?
There's no direct ballot measure for voters to express their will on the horizon. There's, of course, public meetings and side conversations that elected officials always have. And many of them listen to what constituents tell them throughout the year. Community rallies seem to be effective, especially when they are highlighting social equity, at Graham Street.
One more thing before I let you go, because you talked a little bit about, Girmay, Zahilay and Katie Wilson and some of these Sound Transit board members being part-time. They're not transit experts. I did hear some grumbling on social media that the Sound Transit board should be an elected body and not a body of mostly electeds. And I'm curious if you've heard that as well, and what could potentially change there.
You would need an active legislature to change the board structure. It's really hard to say what an elected board would do, but they would have to answer to citizens more often, for sure.
Definitely. All right. Seattle Times transportation reporter Mike Lindbloom, thank you so much for taking the time.
Okay. Thanks, Trish.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now, and make sure to join us this Saturday for a live taping of the show, where I'll be interviewing King County Executive Girmay Zahilay at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. Get tickets at cascadepbs.org/Ideas Festival, and make sure you use promo code Seattle Now to access a 20% discount, or just click that link in our show notes. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. Talk to you tonight for Evening Headlines.